Stanley, Scuba, Sailing, and Adventures. Scuba diving, the British Virgin Islands. Dive site, the Chimney. The Chimney dive site is located in the northern British Virgin Islands, off the west shore of Great Dog. The guide to diving and snorkeling in the British Virgin Islands suggests that this site is good for snorkeling and novice divers. It has a maximum depth of 45 feet and moderate exposure to northerly weather patterns. The Chimney dive site is named the Chimney because it resembles a technical rock climbing slot. From 25 feet, a narrow crack between two large boulders rises to break the surface of the water. This dive site also has a couple beautiful canyons and a pretty large archway that you can swim through. I recorded a swim through of the arch later in the video. In regard to the dive briefing, we descended from the mooring line to a mostly sandy and scattered rock bottom. This was somewhere between 30 to 40 feet in depth. Before hitting the water, we'd taken a compass bearing pointing toward land in the northeast end of the bay. Once we reached depth, we maintained a depth contour of 25 to 35 feet and turned left and then navigated along the shore of the Great Dog and the underwater wall. The contour then turned northeast and the depth dropped to around 45 feet. There was a large coral-covered pillar marking the entrance to the canyon. We followed the canyon south to the large arch. After swimming through the arch, we came to the Chimney. It's unmistakable. We swam through the Chimney and back into the bay where we had started. We then explored the first canyon that was on the left, a dead end or box canyon. Where this canyon ends, we swam over the top in about 10 feet of water and back into the sandy bay. From here, we followed a reciprocal compass course back to the mooring. This was day 5 and dive number 19 for me on this trip. This was the last dive of the day for me and started at approximately 4:55. A single tank dive. It lasted just over 53 minutes. My dive computer recorded a maximum depth of 46 feet and an average depth of 29 feet. The average water temperature recorded was a comfortable 86 degrees Fahrenheit. The visibility doesn't appear spectacular here. I think that was largely due to the cloud cover. The clouds did clear up and the visibility does seem to improve throughout the dive, although again, I think that was really due largely to the cloud cover and that cloud cover dissipating. I don't think there was really a change in the visibility other than that. Luckily, when the sun came out, it was very near the beginning of that first canyon, and then as we went through the arch and up through the Chimney, we had a decent amount of sunlight, so the video is a little bit better there. This is a great dive site. Obviously, the geological formations are the highlight of this site. There were plenty of fish and other things, but the primary focus was to get to and swim through the archway and the Chimney. It's very close to this point in the dive where you can really see that canyon begin to develop in the high walls rising up near the surface. This was a follow the leader type of guided dive, and I was somehow fortunate enough to be just behind the dive guide or leader here in yellow tank, which is very uncommon place for me to be because I'm not a very fast swimmer. Of course, I'm more focused on the camera and video most of the time when I'm diving. Here we're just diving into the deepest part of the canyon, and soon you'll see the archway become visible. Here the dive guide is just below the arch. You'll see that when he turns on his light. Pretty cool arch. As you can see here, it is extremely large. And the walls of the canyon almost straight up and down. At this point, I tried to take a quick look around and get some footage underneath the arch. As you can see, it does get pretty dark right underneath, and the arch is pretty wide. I did have lights on the camera. You can see it there. I didn't want to take too much time. As I was second in line, I didn't want to hold everyone else up. The view here is pretty spectacular, and especially as you come out the other side. As you come out here on the other side of the arch, this leads into the area that's really referred to as the Chimney. When I first heard the dive briefing and saw the drawing, I really thought that the whole thing was the chimney, the archway, and then kind of that slot formation afterwards. It was later when I read about it getting its name from some rock climbing area. I'm not familiar with the Chimney. I'll have to look that up. Right here, where you pass through, I guess, what is technically the chimney, I had to actually turn my camera sideways to fit through. It's just a little narrow, let's see, but I couldn't get through with the lights on the arms. But easily enough for me to swim through without worrying about bumping my shoulders. I did keep my shoulders squared up. It's just the camera that I had to turn sideways to fit through. And there's our dive guide on the other side. As I mentioned, this was dive number 19 for me and day number 5 on this dive trip. I really enjoyed the diving here in the British Virgin Islands, and I'd have to say that the geology was just as interesting as the marine life. A lot of canyons and interesting rock formations. Walls, not walls like you'd think of in terms of leaves with deep plunging walls and lots of coral, but large rock walls that rose to the water's surface from the floor. The visibility in a lot of these videos and a lot of these dives is not spectacular, and I don't think it's an accurate representation of what diving in the British Virgin Islands could be like. I think that's largely to do with the time of year. This was hurricane season. This was kind of a last-minute trip for me. I had planned to go somewhere else, but there were some issues with that boat, so I ended up changing direction and ending up here in the British Virgin Islands. I'd like to return. I think it's a great place to dive. There's a lot to see. Again, really the geology is incredibly interesting to me. And having some better light to work with, I think, could make for some spectacular landscape photography, underwater landscape photography. I'm trying to improve my skills on that. I think it's quite challenging as compared to landscape photography above the water. Not that either one is particularly easy. I think for good underwater landscape photos, you really have to have a clear sky, a lot of sunlight, and some clear water, not much particulate. I love these views of the water breaking on the rocks on the surface from below. Like if I had a lot of sunlight here and there wasn't as much particulate in the water, I think that would have made for some great photos. Here we're entering the other canyon that I'd mentioned in the dive briefing. I guess I must have fallen behind at some point because, as you can see here, I'm no longer second in line, I'm third. But that happens. I get distracted with the camera. Still unusual for me to be this far forward in the line. This really turned out to be a dusk dive. I think that by the time we got to the surface, it was almost 5:45, and the clouds had returned. So it was getting dark, and you'll see at the very end of the video, when I was at my safety stop, it was actually quite dark, especially as far as what the video camera could record. And there was a barracuda that came by and was right next to me during my safety stop. You might be wondering why I would do a safety stop on a dive with an average depth of 29 feet and a max of 46 feet. I guess just out of habit and, doing a lot of repetitive diving, I always do the safety stop. In regard to dive safety, yeah, that's probably why I err on the side of caution with the safety stop, and I don't ever want to go into deco or get locked out, especially when I'm doing 4 or 5 dives a day for 5 to 6 days. Also, in regard to dive safety, I was out having dinner with a friend last night, and of course we were talking about diving, and there was a couple at the next table, and they overheard us, and the gentleman said, I've been out of the water for a while. How long should it be before I do a refresher? And I said, really, if you're out for over a year, you might not be a bad idea to connect with a local dive shop and do a refresher. Here you can see, again, in the dive briefing, I talked about the canyon ending, and then we came up to a depth here of just about 10 feet to swim out of that canyon and back over to the bay, the water breaking on the rocks. Anyway, I digressed a little bit there, but back to the dive refresher. He said it'd been almost 2 years he'd been out, and I don't know what local dive shops charge, but I think a lot of them offer a refresher that's not terribly expensive and that doesn't require a trip to a quarry or open water. I believe that could be done just in the pool. It's been a while since I've been away from that type of work, but as I recall, that's the way things worked. That might not be accurate anymore. We're just kind of cruising along here, and as always, whenever you're diving, you never know what you're going to find or what you're going to come across. It didn't seem like there was a whole lot going on, and we're swimming along, and then we came across this really interesting coral formation. You'll see it here in just a few minutes, and it seemed to come out of nowhere. But isn't that spectacular? You can see the ISO is starting to change on the video camera as the light's fading and the clouds are closing back in, but I did try to get a little closer here so you could get a view of this beautiful coral formation. And it looks so healthy and vibrant too. You see that the ends there, it looks like there's lots of new growth. I believe this is fused staghorn coral. Again, fused staghorn coral. Let me know if you think it's something else, but that's what I am thinking it is, and the information I found says the colonies are 1 to 12 foot. The branch diameters are 3/4 to 6 inch, and they're usually found in a depth of 1 to 90 feet. As you can see, when the sun got lower on the horizon, it quickly changed things underwater, and it's starting to almost look like night. It's not quite yet. The sun is low on the horizon. And it was at this point we came across this giant anemone. Look at that. Isn't that spectacular? Our dive guide was kind enough to find that, point it out, and put some light on it for me. It seemed like things were kind of spread out, and there were some great finds on this dive, especially here towards the end, like this giant anemone. It just kind of seemed like it was out there by itself. A lot of times I'll see those kind of buried in some coral or things like that, or that giant patch of coral we saw. It was kind of out there by itself. At this point, we were getting pretty close back to the mooring, and time to start ascending. Here I'm heading up to the safety stop. You can see that barracuda I mentioned earlier, and I would end up spending a couple minutes with him face to face. He seemed largely unfazed by my presence. I tried to get as close as I could to get a close-up of his face, and at that point I think he thought he'd had enough. I had a couple minutes to kill, so I played a little bit of follow the leader with the barracuda without going too far away from the rest of the group, until eventually he just swam off into the darkness. It was another great end to another great dive and another great day of diving here in the British Virgin Islands. Tomorrow would be the last day of diving, and I'd only make one dive. So there'll be one more dive in this dive series. The next and final dive will be at the dive site, Carvel Rock. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment.